At one point, Kenyan street music was impossible to escape. Every club, every estate, every matatu had the same sound, a loud, chaotic, and energetic sound that was taking over the country. And behind some of the biggest Gengetone hits was one producer.
Magix Enga on the beat.
He wasn't the artist in front of the camera, but his sound was everywhere. For a moment, it felt like every hit coming out of Nairobi had his fingerprints on it. But while the music kept getting louder, the man behind it was slowly falling apart. Controversies, pressure, online chaos, and a producer who once looked untouchable started disappearing from the spotlight. So what really happened to Magix Enga? Because behind every hit, there's a story nobody was paying attention to, and that story started long before the fame. Remember to subscribe if you enjoy this content. But long before his producer tag echoed through Kenyan speakers, Magix Enga was just a young man named Amos Chege Njenga. He was born in Nakuru. He grew up during a period when Kenyan music was evolving fast. A new generation was starting to take over. The streets were changing the sound of music, and youth culture was becoming impossible to ignore. And while artists were chasing the spotlight, Magix Enga became fascinated by what was happening behind the scenes. The beats, the mixing, the process of turning raw energy into music people could feel. What started as curiosity slowly became an obsession. He spent countless hours learning production, trying to understand sound, and trying to create something different. At the time, nobody knew the music he was experimenting with would eventually become part of a movement that changed Kenyan street music forever. Because as Nairobi's underground sound kept growing, so did the ambitions of a young producer from Nakuru. And soon, the name Magix Enga will begin appearing everywhere and in every hit. In 2018, Kenyan music was changing. For years, the industry had already gone through different eras: Kapuka, Genge, and heavy influences from international sounds like Afrobeats. But this time, something different was happening. A new generation of young Kenyans wanted music that sounded closer to their everyday lives, to their estates, their matatu conversations, the slang, and the chaos of Nairobi itself. And then, Gengetone arrived. It was loud, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. The music carried the energy of the streets, fast beats, aggressive flows, and sheng that connected instantly with Kenyan youth. It didn't sound polished like mainstream radio music, and that was exactly why people loved it. Almost overnight, Gengetone became more than just a genre. It became a culture. Matatus blasted it through oversized speakers. Campus parties couldn't function without it. Clubs played it every weekend. And on social media, the movement spread even faster. For the first time in Kenya, many young Kenyans felt like they had a sound that truly belonged to them. But while artists became the faces of the movement, producers were shaping the sound from behind the scenes. They controlled the energy, the bounce, the drums, the feeling every song carried. And one producer quickly began standing out was Magix Enga. His beats were explosive, loud drums, fast rhythms, pure energy. His production felt designed for Nairobi, for matatus, for clubs, and for street parties. And as Gengetone continued taking over Kenya, more artists started looking for Magix Enga. One hit became another, then another, and before long, his sound was everywhere. And as Gengetone exploded across the country, so did the name Magix Enga. At this point, he was no longer just another producer behind the scenes. He was becoming the sound of an entire movement. Some of the biggest Gengetone hits carried his production style, from Giddy Giddy with Arrow Boy to Dundaing with King Kaka, a style that had now become instantly recognizable. The drums were louder, the beats were faster, and the energy felt impossible to ignore. Everywhere he went, his sound followed. In clubs, matatus, house parties, and across Kenyan social media, Gengetone was dominating youth culture, and Magix Enga was one of the producers helping push that movement forward. His reputation grew. More artists wanted to work with him. The demand kept increasing, and so did the expectations. For a moment, it felt like Magix Enga could do no wrong. But behind the success, the pressure was also beginning to grow. Because fame in the internet era moves fast, and sometimes it disappears even faster. But as Magix Enga's influence continued growing, so did the pressure around him. At this point, he was no longer just known for the music. He was becoming one of the most talked about figures in Kenyan street music. And with attention came controversies. One of the earliest public fallouts linked to Magix Enga involved rising dancehall artist Rudra Cartel, known for his strong resemblance to Vybz Kartel. In short, Rudra Cartel is Kenya's version of Vybz Kartel. At the time, Rudra Cartel had quickly built attention online, his style becoming so noticeable that even Vybz Kartel himself would eventually acknowledge him on his Instagram page. And for a while, Magix Enga appeared heavily involved in his rise. The two worked together on several songs including tracks like Kings. And it seemed like Magix Enga had found another major artist connected to his growing brand. But behind the scenes, the relationship was slowly collapsing. Rudra Cartel would later claim that Magix Enga had never truly helped his career, adding that he was never officially signed under him.
Magix Enga anajaribu kuonyesha nimesign. Mbona sionyeshe nikirarua hiyo contract? Na nilirarua, nilikataa kusign. Mbona? Mimi mwenyewe sina ID na hadi yeye mwenyewe anajua. Anajaribu kuforce nini? Alikuwa aniambia ati nikitoka Magix Empire artist haikuwa star. Ndo maana unaona ati sija record ngoma nyingine, anashinda akirecord, ana report vitu YouTube zenye nimetoa na si unashinda rada yake ni gani? Mbona anipatie freedom? Anaonyesha nimesign ndio nisitoe na mtu yoyote ngoma. Ni nini man?
But Magix Enga strongly rejected those claims. According to him, he had supported Rudra financially, offered free studio sessions, helped with rent, and tried to guide his music career. The fallout became even more public after allegations surfaced that Magix Enga had blocked the release of Rudra Cartel's EP. Magix Enga reportedly argued that the project relied too heavily on Vybz Kartel's inspired material and believed Rudra needed to create more original sound and his songs. And as the tension continued online, fans slowly began seeing another side of Magix Enga, not just the producer behind the hits, but a figure constantly surrounded by conflict. By 2020, the controversies had become even bigger. At one point, Magix Enga claimed that American rapper Tekashi 69 had used a beat similar to one of his productions on the song Guba. The claim quickly spread online, especially after the video was temporarily removed from YouTube. But just like another dispute involving Tanzanian artist Harmonize, the song was later reinstated. In the Harmonize situation, Magix Enga accused the Tanzanian star of sampling a beat from the song Dundaing in his track Uno. The removal of the song generated heavy online debate. Some fans believed that Magix Enga was protecting his work as a producer, but others accused him of chasing attention. And slowly, the conversation around Magix Enga was beginning to change. People were no longer talking only about the music. They were talking about the controversies, the interviews, the online arguments. And with every viral moment, his public image became more unpredictable. Because while Gengetone was still dominating the streets, the pressure behind the scenes were beginning to grow. And by 2022, the image of Magix Enga was beginning to collapse. The producer who once dominated Kenyan street music was now becoming increasingly associated with controversies. One of the biggest turning points came after an interview with presenter Ali. During the interview, Magix Enga made shocking claims that quickly spread across social media. He stated that he was part of the Illuminati, claiming he had joined at the age of 23 because of the hardships he was facing at the time. The interview immediately went viral. For many fans, it was confusing. For others, it became another reason to criticize him. But later, Magix Enga took back the statements. He claimed that he had been under the influence of drugs during the interview and admitted that part of it was also an attempt to attract attention online. But by then, the damage had already been done. His reputation was beginning to suffer.
Interview nilikuwa hiyo time nilikuwa nimejaa. Sasa sikata ukiangalia comments sasa nilikuwa tuna stress zangu nini niaje Enga kuja tufanye interview. Siko na kitu kusema, so mimi nikaangalia huko niaje. Zile interview nimekuwa nikiona kwa channel yako ni za content, so let me give you the same content. So mimi kwa mind yangu nikaanza kujituma, but mimi mwenyewe sikulipi na hiyo kitu naona kuna call. I believe Mungu muomba like every day like what.
And according to Magix Enga himself, some clients and artists slowly started distancing themselves from him. And as the controversies continued, he also began opening up publicly about his struggles with drug addiction. And behind the viral moments, a much darker reality was starting to appear. Because by 2023, the situation had become even worse. Magix Enga eventually lost his studio due to unpaid rent. Imagine, the same producer who had once created major Gengetone hits was now struggling financially. In several interviews, he blamed part of those struggles on the music industry itself. He claimed that many artists had never properly compensated him, despite the success of songs he helped produce. According to Magix Enga, one of the biggest problems was working without proper contracts or legal representation. He argued that some artists had taken advantage of him during the peak of his career. And one of the artists he publicly mentioned was Arrowboy.
I'm working on fiction 10 million views, you understand?
Bogani.
Digidigi. Sijaipata anything out of Digidigi, hata 1k. You understand? Msanii amekuwa big, amenikuwa. So ni normal, mi kazi yangu ni kusaidia watu tuna appreciate manze, hiyo ndio kazi yangu, kushua sasa wanainuka. Inangengana na kami, kiinuka, hiyo ndio lifestyle.
Magix Enga claimed that despite producing successful songs, he received very little financial benefit from them. He even stated that he never truly profited from some of the biggest hits associated with his name, including Dundaing and Watoto na Pombe. And as his financial struggles became more public, so did the concern from fans.
So atakwambia digi ya kulipa, Arrowboy ya kulipa.
Jai nilipa hata bob.
Wakati King Kaka
sasa hiyo tunatembea naye tunakula beans za 30 bob hapo nje, tunarudi studio na nalala peke yangu usiku mzima akiwa kwa kiti nikimaster.
Okay, so
at one point, Magix Enga made an emotional post online while holding his young child. In the post, he appealed directly to the president for help. It was a shocking moment for many fans. Just a few years earlier, Magix Enga had been one of the most recognizable producers in Kenyan street music. But now, the situation around him looked completely different. There were also reports that he had reached out to comedian and media personality Eric Omondi for support. And allegedly, according to the reports, the request was allegedly not successful, with concerns reportedly linked to the controversies surrounding Magix Enga at the time, including rumors, public behavior, and his admitted struggles with drug addiction. But perhaps the most painful part was how quiet everything had become. The internet that once celebrated him was now mostly watching from a distance. The industry kept moving. New artists disappeared. New sounds replaced Gengetone. And slowly, Magix Enga faded further away from the spotlight. For many fans, it felt like watching the end of an era, because whether people agreed with his choices or not, there was no denying one thing. For a period of time, Magix Enga helped shape the sound of Kenyan street music. But in 2024, there were finally signs that things around Magix Enga were beginning to change. In January that year, media personality Willie Mtuva publicly offered to help Magix Enga. At the moment, he gave fans hope that the producer was slowly finding support again. And just a month later, Magix Enga announced on Instagram that he was preparing for a comeback. In the post, he thanked the people who had supported him through some of the darkest moments of his life. Over time, he slowly returned to music production. He later began working as a producer at big Afric studios in Eldoret. And compared to the chaos that once surrounded his name, Magix Enga now seemed to be choosing a quieter life. No major controversies, no online drama, no constant attention seeking, just music. And although the massive buzz he once commanded during the peak of Gengetone may no longer be there, that no longer seems to matter as much. Today, Magix Enga continues producing music, sharing new projects online, and focusing more on quality and positivity. Because in the end, the story of Magix Enga is not just about fame, or controversy, or even downfall. It is also a story about pressure, the internet, the music industry, and how quickly success can change. For a moment, Magix Enga helped create the sound of Kenyan street music. And even though that era may have faded, the impact he left behind is still impossible to ignore. So what really happened to Magix Enga? Maybe he simply became another example of how fast the music industry can build someone and how fast it can forget them.